Southminster. Sorry, I totally thought we had like 5 more minutes or so, and I was waiting for the ball part. But welcome to Southminster. I'm Don Ludwig, the associate pastor here, and we're glad that you were able to weather the heat to be here. Can you imagine 111 degrees in Portland in June? Amazing temperatures. So we want you to know that you're welcome. Everyone who comes to our space is welcome to this place. If you can, on the end of the aisles are some worship pads, and what they are is simply if you can sign in, let us know that you were here. That would be wonderful. And also, we want to welcome everyone joining us on Zoom today. So, a few announcements, actually several announcements. So obviously, you've heard from the governor that things are reopening. So we expect that on Wednesday this week, that everyone will not have to wear masks anymore unless you choose to. That way we can remember what everyone looks like, so that'll be a very good thing. Also, something that's just happened over the last week, the art show has decided, and they have voted with session approval that we will have an art show 2022. So lots of enthusiasm for all the things that are reopening and redefining themselves. Also, I'll let you know if you are available at all during the summer and can help in any small way, especially in the office. Lisa really needs help with certain tasks that she needs to have done. Remember, our office assistant goes down to 20 hours a week during the summer, and there are tasks that we need to get done. So if you can email her and let her know, that would be great. Also, tomorrow is a Good Quantity session with Pastor Scott, once again at the Lanhart Cafe, Southwest Watson, and First in downtown Beaverton. And he would love to have you there. On Tuesday night is the last of 3 sessions for the adult education unit, which is on religious nationalism. If you missed the first 2, you'll join right in on the 3rd one as we talk about how can we respond to religious nationalism. So Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, either on Zoom or here in the sanctuary. And Dan Rasmussen is going to share on the adult ed.
It's me. I was in disguise there. Yes, the Adult Education Committee, which I guess I am now the chair, is redoing something that we've done in the past. Southminster Reads. The idea is simply to pick a book where we have some connection with the author, invite as many Southminster people as possible to read that book, and then sometime in the fall we'll arrange to have some sort of a chat with the author and be able to ask her questions and discuss the book with the author. Advantages of this book that we chose this time, called In Defense of Kindness by Bruce Reyes Chow, are it's very readable and fairly short. So I've purchased 3 additional copies with church money, and I'm going to put them out on the table in the lobby area, and we'll do this on the honor system. If you want to borrow one of the church copies, please take it. Please bring it back. Preferably within a week or 2. I said it was a short book. It's a quick read, and so hopefully bring it back and someone else will get a chance to read it. We'll put these through circulation a little bit. I'm even going to add my own copy to the pile and hopefully get that one back too. It's I'm going to say one thing about the book, which is I found it a little misleading because it's a title that makes you think, oh, it's this all about how we need to be nice and get along. It's not about that at all. This comes from the perspective of a very progressive Presbyterian pastor. It's not preachy or churchy or even religious in tone. He's just talking about how humans can be kind to each other, even when they're on the internet, even when they're in a pandemic, even when they're in a rough election, or even when they're on the internet, or even on a street protest. I mean, he covers it all. So, and it's written in a wonderful kind of snarky, personal, very friendly first-person style. And I'm going to read you just a tiny bit to give you a flavor of it. His chapter called, because this really made me laugh, so hopefully you find it funny too. His chapter called Kindness in the Internet starts out, Roseanne Barr once trolled me. Okay, a little background. In 2008, I was elected to the office of moderator of the Presbyterian Church USA. Then he talks about that a little bit more. And he says, in a kind of snarky way, and then he says, I make light of the relative notoriety of the office of moderator, but actually I'm not meaning to downplay those who had helped pave the way for me to be elected. Yet no one outside of the true church nerd Presbyterian types really cared about my election. The title moderator alone triggers nap time, Presbyterian or not. I'm sure if the title had been something like His Royal Highness of St. Badassery, or for you Friends fans out there, some form of Princess Consuela banana hammock, my renown would have been global. Instead, my children once described to their friends why I traveled so much, quote, my dad is very important to a very small group of people. So, a little flavor of the book.
Thank you, Dan. And the youth are going to be actually using that book as our theme reading for the week of missions. So, finally, just remember that there's always something for families, children, and youth every Sunday this summer except July 4th. Remind you about the all-church picnic on July 25th. Mark your calendar, the rum sale on August 5 through 7. So today our lay reader is David Pierce, and let's take a moment and pause for reflection. From Elaine Day Budden, feeling lost, crazy, and desperate belongs to a good life as much as optimism, certainty, and reason. Please stand and join David Pierce with the call of worship.
Our call to worship today is by pastor and poet Tom Schumann. With friends and strangers, with family and neighbors, we gather. With faith reaching out to touch, with hearts straining to trust, we hope. With word and wonder, with silence and song, we wait.
be seated. And I wanted to wait till now for us to recognize that our bell choir is back, and it's so good to have you all. So they've been rehearsing for a few months now with masks on and social distancing. And so today they have a song for us called Deep River. Thank you, Bells. It is so good to have you back in worship. For those of you that have not heard my story, I grew up in Spokane, Washington as a part of a dysfunctional family and found my salvation through a local Presbyterian church. And while in Spokane, I moved like 15 times before I graduated high school. So I was really a low-income person, and I've been drawn to low-income ministries my whole life long, which leads me to when I came to Southminster, we started the Spokane mission trip experience for our high school youth about 14 years ago. We've been there 7 times. This summer will be our 8th time. Our youth voted unanimously they want to return this summer, if possible. So August 10th through the 15th, I already have 20 people signed up. We expect maybe about 25 people on the trip. And what an excellent way to not only be involved with mission and kindness, as the book that is our Southminster reads, but also a way for our youth to really come back together after have not met really for a year and a half or more. and hopefully this will galvanize us as we move forward in our ministry to young people here at Southminster. What I do know about Spokane is that they've had a struggle of a time at Westminster House and Westminster Presbyterian Church, and they are thrilled to have our entity come back to them, and we're going to be working with low-income people as well as homeless youth on the streets of Spokane, as well as bolstering their food kitchen ministry and lots of things. So if you are able to provide support to the youth mission trip this summer, the rum sale is one way to do that, but any other way that would be great. Last thing I will say, B. Lutzinger, please stand up. Can you stand up? B has been a volunteer leader on the Spokane mission trip 3 times over the years, so thank you, B. So as we remember all the goodness that is around us and all that we are called to be in the world around us, may we always remember that we belong to God. Let us sing.
Our first reading is from the Common English Bible. The Greek Testament reading is Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. Jesus crossed the lake again, and on the other side a large crowd had gathered around him on the shore. Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, came forward. When he saw Jesus, he fell to his feet, and pleaded with him. "My daughter is about to die. Please come, place your hands on her so that she may be healed and live." So Jesus went with them. A swarm of people were following Jesus, crowding in on him. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a lot under the care of many doctors and had spent everything she had without getting any better. In fact, she'd gotten worse. Because she'd heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. She was thinking, if I can just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Her bleeding stopped almost immediately, and she sensed in her body that her illness had been healed. At that very moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "Did you see the crowd pressing against you? Yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus looked around carefully to see who had done it. The woman, full of fear and trembling, came forward. Knowing what had happened to her, she fell down in front of Jesus and told him the whole truth. He responded, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, heal from your disease." When Jesus was still preaching When Jesus was still speaking with her, messengers came from the synagogue leader's house, saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Why bother the teacher any longer?" But Jesus overheard their report and said to the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid. Just keep trusting." He didn't allow anyone to follow him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. They came to the synagogue leader's house, and he saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "What's all this commotion and crying about? The child isn't dead. She's only sleeping." They laughed at him, but he threw them all out. Then, taking the child's parents and his disciples with him, he went to the room where the child was. Taking her hand, he said, "Talitha kum," which means, "Young woman, get up." Suddenly, the young woman got up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. They were shocked. He gave them strict orders that no one should know what had happened. Then he told them to give her something to eat. Our theme reading, is from Raymond Radijouet, a French author who, by the way, died when he was only 20 years old. This is from his novel, The Devil in the Flesh. Facing death calmly is praiseworthy only if one faces it alone. Death together is no longer death, even for unbelievers. The source of sorrows lies not in leaving life, but in leaving that which gives it meaning. When love is our whole life, what difference is there between living together and dying together?
Thank you, David. That would have been the very proper sermon altogether. Our Creator, we are gathered on this day in this place of sanctuary out of the heat. We remember that there are those outside who are doing the best they can to get by. Our hearts are with them, just as they are with one another here. Amen. So last week we looked at a miracle story from Mark's Gospel that had at its center the desperation of Jesus' disciples. A storm had come up on the Sea of Galilee. They're in a tiny fishing boat, and by calming the wind, Jesus also manages to calm the hearts of his friends. Well, this week we get two miracles connected with desperate people, and the accounts of them are told so well and with such startling, striking, relatable detail that they have the capacity to touch us at our deepest places. And this time Jesus isn't a remote figure dealing with cosmic powers over a lake that is in upheaval. This time it's as if we are right there with him and those who are so desperate all together. Maybe it's because we can so easily identify with the father whose daughter was fine yesterday but today is dying, and also the woman who has a chronic condition and has been sick for a dozen years. I mean, look, I think of my own daughter when I think of Jairus' daughter, and the woman with the hemorrhage could easily be my own mom. Now, I've spoken of my daughter's recent cancer diagnosis, but I also think of how desperate I was many years ago when she was age 4 and was suffering from what seemed to be simple ankle sprains. Both ankles at once, which was weird. We liked her pediatrician a lot, but all she could recommend was wrapping the ankles and waiting. Well, my daughter started feeling very, very sick one night, and we took her to Emmanuel Hospital in Northeast around midnight. And the doctor we saw there looked her over and unwrapped one of the ankles and nothing prepared me to see the mass of purple bubbles her ankle had become. I was immediately terrified, but this specialist wasn't fazed at all, and without any need of a blood test, he announced that she had an autoimmune disorder that could be serious, but that for most was just a stage of development that would pass in a couple of months. And he was right. So in a moment, I went from the terror of something that looked incredibly worrying to being told that my daughter had a rare but treatable childhood condition. So I, the desperate dad, felt lucky to be with someone who kept his cool and knew what was up. When Frederick Buechner's daughter was in the hospital struggling with anorexia and declining, Buechner wrote, "The only way I knew to be her father was to take care of her, to move heaven and earth to make her well, and of course, I couldn't do that. I didn't have either the wisdom or the power to make her well." And it was killing him. So, okay, let's look at the original story from this morning's text. Jesus starts to walk with Jairus toward Jairus' home to see his critically ill daughter. And in a moment, there comes an interruption. A woman shyly approaches Jesus from behind and touches his garment. He feels it, feels power go out of him. So he stops walking and attends directly to her. She's desperate too. We don't know her name, but we know her condition. She's been slowly, steadily hemorrhaging blood for a dozen years, and her condition has made her a pariah, an outcast. Mark tells us something that makes members of the medical profession actually cringe. He says, she had endured much under many physicians and had spent all the money she had, and she was no better, but had grown worse. It's an old story, right? I mean, disease being as tricky as it is, bad stuff still happens. And people are sick sometimes for decades. And then somebody finally figures out they have, Lyme disease or something else that is difficult to identify. In the case of this woman, no one wants anything, in fact, to do with her. It wasn't only the awkwardness, the aesthetics of her condition. No, the law itself prescribed her marginalization. I'm speaking of the religious law. She was considered ritually unclean, and anyone who touched her was also considered unclean. She could not do what the religious law required, a monthly ritual of cleansing, which made a woman ritually and religiously clean again. Worse, she was not permitted to enter the synagogue because of her condition. So it doesn't take much imagination to understand this woman's isolation and her terrible loneliness. The guilt imposed on her by her religion was reinforced upon her every single day by the community that would have nothing to do with her. There she is, that's the one. And so she, like Jairus, is desperate, and she comes to Jesus. She is suddenly a Jesus person because being a religious person all these years has not only not helped her, it has been the worst. So Jesus stops and talks with her. And you can imagine how Jairus' anxiety is increasing, right? Because his daughter's dying and Jesus is chatting with this woman. I imagine the woman herself cowering in fear. She didn't expect, right, to be noticed. Heck, she didn't think she was even worthy of his notice. A touch of his garment is all she was looking for, hoping that that alone might do the trick. She's obviously in awe of him, and she should be. He knows that her touching him in the crowded street was not accidental. And look, she gets more than his attention. She gets his compassion. She gets his love. He calls her daughter. Daughter, which can sound condescending, But under these circumstances, with her essential enforced loneliness and the fact that she's hoping to escape his notice, it's clearly a term of endearment. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Instead of leaving the scene disappointed and shamed, she goes away healed and affirmed as a worthy person. Formerly estranged, she's called a daughter. Jesus heals her totally, body, mind, and spirit, which is what makes him who he is, right? Okay, all well and good. But now there's a new problem here. Jesus is now unclean. He's been touched by a ritually unclean woman. The law is clear about this, too. He must stop right there, go to a ritual bathing place, take off his clothes, wash them, bathe himself, and enter no house until sundown. But instead, Jesus continues with Jairus, continues on as this unclean holy man. So, religion here, instead of helping, is getting in the way all over the place. Religious rules are preventing healing. And this, too, is an old story, right? A new vaccine was announced a couple of decades ago that protects women from a cancer that begins with an STD. We all know about this. It's a form of cancer that killed my grandmother, in fact. And some Christian organizations objected at the time, arguing that availability of such a vaccine, which is regularly administered to teenage girls, will encourage sexual activity before marriage. For them, the risk of cervical cancer and death is acceptable because of the possible violation of a religious rule. See, this is the same stuff going on in our time as in Jesus's. Condoms prevent AIDS. No one disputes that, but some religious groups oppose those too. Yes, and good sex education prevents a lot of teen pregnancy. Everyone knows that, but many Christian groups oppose that as well, which makes me absolutely crazy. And this kind of thinking makes Jesus crazy too. We've got good company here. In today's text, he deliberately violates a traditional religious rule, a taboo, in order to heal and restore a woman. He knows the wrong-headedness of much of religion, and it makes him a target of the religious authorities, right? Eventually, this stuff will get him killed. They despise his willingness to reach across social and religious barriers to a marginalized, rejected outcast from West Spokane, in order to restore her to wholeness and welcome her to the kingdom of God, where there are no walls and no outcasts. It's impossible to read this story, right, without gleaning from it the corrective that it is the job of religion not to invest its energy in protecting its purity, whatever that is, but to live out its purpose, opening doors, opening its arms, to welcome all, particularly those who are outcasts. That's what the Church of Jesus Christ started out to be, ought to be now, during Pride Month, during every month, right? Not building barriers, drawing lines to exclude, but reaching out, touching, extending hospitality, being touched, accepting, welcoming, affirming, receiving specifically those who culture and religion itself has branded unclean. Calling them by their real names, daughters, and sons of God, right? But tragically, this is not a message that 80% of American Christians understand, which is absolutely shocking. Okay, back to the story. Now Jesus resumes his journey to Jairus' house. Messengers approach. It's too late. The little girl has died. Mourners are already there. Weeping is audible. Funeral arrangements are underway. And unfazed Jesus continues. They're saying, be realistic, Jesus. Face reality. She's dead. No, on he walks. She's just sleeping, he says. She's going to be all right. And they laugh at him. Now let's remember, he's unclean. He's been touched by an unclean woman, and he's now entering the house of a leader of the synagogue, a fastidious keeper of the holiness code. Nothing in his house is unclean except Jesus. It's wonderfully ironic. And then Jesus takes her tiny hand in his. And the law is clear about that too. Touching a dead body renders a person unclean, on top of being unclean already. And those who do so must also engage in ritual cleansing and bathing immediately. So a second time, Jesus is deemed unclean. This time because of his own action. And he takes her small hand in his and addresses her lifeless body, and for the second time says something so intimate and affectionate. It is startling. So startling, Mark gives it to us untranslated. In the very Aramaic language that Jesus spoke growing up and his whole life long. Talitha kumi, little girl, arise. Which actually translates more literally, little lamb, let me help you up. This is beautiful stuff. And it's all because Jesus was a beautiful person. One of a kind. So, if you're one of those who says, I'm not a religious person, but I'm spiritual, then Jesus is your man. I mean, he wasn't particularly religious either. At least he never let religion get in the way of doing the right thing. Never let religion get in the way of doing the right thing. See, this whole country is all screwed up when it comes to religion right now. And it's just so clear in this story why. In an era now where religious people, whether they be Christian or Muslim or Jew, are too often the source of outrageous, appalling behavior, all in the name of their God, Jesus is a breath of fresh air. He must sigh hourly over what way too many misinformed Christian teachers are saying he wants our world today to look like. Okay, now I could end there, but I'm still thinking of the woman who'd been sick for 12 years. Think for a minute what illness does to a person over time. You may know very well what I'm talking about here. To say it wears us down is a vast understatement. Here is, I want to close with a first-person story by a woman named Donna Markova. For me, it brings alive what must have taken place between Jesus and the woman with the hemorrhage. Donna writes this. She says, when I was in the hospital, the one person whose presence I welcomed was a woman who came to sweep the floors with a large push broom. She was the only person who didn't stick things in me, or take things out, or ask stupid questions. For a few minutes each night, this immense Jamaican woman rested her broom against the walls and sank her body into a turquoise plastic chair in my room. All I heard was the sound of her breath in and out, in and out. It was comforting in a strange and simple way. My own breathing calmed. Of the 50 or 60 or so people that made contact with me in a given day, she was the only one who wasn't trying to change me. One night she reached out and put her hand on the top of my shoulder. I'm not usually comfortable with casual touch, but her hand felt so natural being there. It happened to be one of the few places in my body that didn't hurt. I could have sworn she was saying 2 words with each breath, one on the inhale and the other on the exhale. As is. As is. On her next visit to me, she looked right at me. No evaluation, no trying to figure me out. She just looked and saw me. And then she said simply, "You're more than the sickness in that body." I was pretty doped up, so I wasn't sure I understood her, but my mind was just too thick to ask questions. I kept mumbling those words to myself throughout the following day. I'm more than the sickness in this body. I'm more than the suffering in this body. I remember her voice clearly. It was rich, deep, full, like maple syrup in the spring. I reached out for her hand. It was cool and dry. I knew she wouldn't let go. She continued, "You're not the fear in that body. You're more than that fear. Float on it. Float above it. You're more than that pain." I began to breathe a little deeper, as I did when I wanted to float in a lake. I remembered floating in Lake George when I was 5, floating in the Atlantic Ocean at Coney Island when I was 7, floating in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Africa when I was 28. Without any instructions from me, this Jamaican guide had led me to a source of comfort that was wider and deeper than pain or fear. It's been 15 years since I've seen the woman with the broom. I've never been able to find her. No one can remember her name, but she touched my soul with her compassionate presence, and her fingerprints are there still. Amen.
out in sorrow. Lord, I want Jesus to walk with me.
Please be seated. We come to our time of joys and concerns, and I invite you to share any joys and concerns that you might have. So, anyone have any concerns or joys? Yes.
And my prayers for my son who's fighting for custody of his children.
So Judy Foster for prayers for your son fighting custody for children. So, all right.
And we can celebrate, I've done this before I've read so much lately, but he has over a year of sobriety.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And yes, Sandy.
The family of Dennis Peterson. Dennis died a couple days ago.
Then the family of Dennis Peterson. Dennis died a couple days ago. Yes.
The family of my nephew, Ray Shaxel, passed away last Saturday.
So, and say the name again.
His first name, they called him Willie, and his last name was Shaxel.
Willie Schatzel. He passed away.
He passed away. His family's having a difficult time with it.
Okay. Yeah, certainly. And that's on the other hand. Yeah, Karen.
My son-in-law, Howard Fan, who's having some health issues.
So Howard Fan, certainly with health issues. Tom.
For the families in Florida who don't know what's happening to their loved ones, hopefully there will be more recoveries.
Certainly. The tragedy in Florida is just amazing. So keeping the family and friends in our prayer. And Doug, same. So, very good. And Barbara.
With Greta Roll dealing with Peter's death, and Greta's going to be moving to another floor, and I'm not sure exactly when that's happening.
Okay. So Greta Roll is moving to a different floor. But certainly we'll keep Greta and the family in our prayers and have a service sometime later in the summer. And Mary.
And everyone around the globe who's dealing with excessive heat and climate change, that we all know is happening, but a lot don't want to believe.
Yeah. So remembering everyone around the globe dealing with climate issues and tragedies all over. So Jason.
Off of Zoom, Diane Bender says, my son goes back to work next week after 16 months of furlough. And I have one. I got a job offer. Full-time K8, the Lower Hubert Park, general music and choir.
So Beaverton School District. So we're so happy for Jason. Yes.
So after 5,451 miles and 17 days, and Matt and I didn't kill each other, and we're home safe and sound.
You're back. Didn't kill each other, but I noticed he's not here.
I think we have pink eyes.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. Yes.
Our daughter-in-law's mother has been in the hospital for the last 6 months with COVID.
Oh, 6 months. Wow. Certainly a reminder that COVID is still real even as we plan to reopen and so forth. So, yes. Yeah.
So a celebration that last week I got to go
and Claire Schrader once, just thankfulness for wonderful times with family and reconnecting in different places. So let's take a moment and pause ourselves, our lives, and just take in this moment, this space, with people all around us who care and love, who commit to being present with us in the good times and in difficult times. We give thanks for seeing new faces and for reopening as a church and as a society. And even in the midst of reopening, we ask for prayers for this COVID-19, that we may continue to be diligent in doing what we can as a society and as a people, as persons, to mitigate this disease. We remember all the prayer concerns that were just mentioned and ask for grace and hope, even when it is difficult to see. May each of us strive to be kind to our neighbors. May each of us remember all those throughout our world that are not as fortunate as ourselves. And may we as a collective community grow together and learn ways that we can be an impact in our world. In all these things we give thanks. Amen. And I invite you to pray the corporate prayer, which is printed in the bulletin. Yeah, there we go. So, O thou, from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms of sound, light, and vibration, may your light be experienced in our hearts. Your heavenly domain approaches. Let your light come true in the universe and on earth. Give us wisdom for our daily needs. Detach the fetters of faults that bind us, as we do our best to let go of the guilt of others. Let us not be lost in superficial things, but let us be freed from that which keeps us from our true purpose. From you comes all working will, the lively strength to act, the song that beautifies I, all age to age, sealed to trust, faith, and truth. Confirm in this your community. Amen. Thank you, Scott. I've never seen that prayer before, and I really like it. So let's stand together and join in our final closing song, Shalom.
Shalom, my friends, the Lord be with you. God's peace go with you wherever you go. Shalom, my friends, In a world of indifference, let us make a difference. Shalom, my friends. Shalom, my friends. The Lord be with you. God's peace go with you wherever you go. Shalom, my friends. In a world of indifference, let us make the difference. Shalom, my friends. Shalom, my friends.
So let us remember once again that life is short, and we have not much time to gladden the hearts of those who traveled the way with us. So be swift to love, make haste to be kind, and may the peace of Christ, which passes all understanding, keep our hearts and minds today and tomorrow and down all our days. Our service is ended, but we invite you to linger for the postlude and to gather and visit outdoors.
Yeah.